had so much discussion, I want to take one step back and just make a couple explanations. So hopefully as we are laying all of this out, you can kind of remember the other two systems as well. Let me take just a minute. I'm going to take my notebook here so I can look at it at the same time so I get this right. Let me talk about amillennialism here for just a second. So you may want to just copy the chart. And there are two views of amillennialism. So the first thing I'm going to give you two views. The first view is what you would call Augustine's viewpoint. And that is, down here, Israel and the church equals one people. One people. All right, there's not a distinction, as we had mentioned in dispensationalism. The church is the kingdom on earth. No 7 years of tribulation. They would maintain we always have tribulation. You understand the 7-year came out of the book of Daniel. All right? And there's some problems with that too, because when you get to his weeks, he has all of these weeks, and then you get to the week, that 39th or 40th week, and all of a sudden that week has lasted 1,000 years or so now, or however long it's lasting. So again, can you take these things literally or figuratively? The postmillennialists would say, if we are going to take 1,000 literally, then are we supposed to take a day as 1,000 years and 1,000 years? I mean, you know, these are these literals or imageries or what? So again, this is the second coming, the rapture, all of those things are the same thing. So the second coming is both rapture as well. It's all summed up into one event. When Jesus comes down, the saints, general resurrection arise, and they come down and they function for the rest of eternity. All right, the book of the Revelation is symbolic of God's kingdom triumphing through the church. All right, and the tribulation period, the millennial periods are symbolic terms for the age-long struggle of evil against Christ's rule. Now the second amillennial view, which came from a Presbyterian named Warfield, who says many of the same things. He says Israel and the church are one people, but he says that the kingdom promises are now spiritual or they're in heaven. Fulfilled in heaven. So, when you're seated with Christ in heavenly places, as Paul said, that's the fulfillment. Personally, you can experience spiritually the fulfillment of the kingdom. The church, in Warfield's view, the church is not the kingdom on earth. Because those promises are fulfilled spiritually in heaven. Again, realizing that is better understood as realized. Okay? I know you want to translate that as no millennium. All right, there's no millennium. And it's true, there's no 1,000-year millennium. That is true. But they aren't maintaining that there's not any kingdom victory. Kingdom victory has been realized already in the believer by what Christ has accomplished. Yes, ma'am.
Side note, so could you be a spirit-filled charismatic and be an amillennialist because you don't believe that the kingdom Now, we teach the kingdom is within us, and the kingdom, God's kingdom rule should be here in our world right now.
Well, no, that's more postmillennial. See, postmillennial will begin. No, honestly, amillennialism has more to do with a person's personal piety, promise, and spiritual victory than it does anything else on the earth.
Okay, so
it's what Christ has provided for you really doesn't go much beyond you. You can experience victory.
Okay.
You can enjoy the fruits of righteousness and the Spirit. And for the kingdom of God is not meat or drink, but righteousness, peace, and joy in the Holy Ghost. That's what you get to enjoy. So you're in the kingdom. And that's the expression of the kingdom. So you're in a millennial reign in as much as you get to enjoy that personally, spiritually.
Okay.
You're following me? Now, the reason the holiness movement liked amillennialism is because it underscored personal victory in the heart, and they taught
Sanctification.
exactly that you could be free from sin. Then that's why so many of the early holiness writers went to amillennialism, because that's what it literally taught, and that's about as far as it went.
Yeah.
There was really no other ramification of sanctification besides your personal piety.
Right.
Okay, so, and again, the only difference here between Augustine and Warfield is that Augustine would allow it to exist in the church. Warfield said no, it was basically a person, but either way, it didn't go much farther than that.
Isn't that the same thing as a works mentality, though? Because if you're working to be sanctified just because the works that you're doing is making you righteous.
Yeah. Well, we aren't in theology class, so there's a great question with that one.
Okay,
But there is a sanctification that happens completely by God's hand and grace, but there's also a part that we do participate in, that's why he said that when we see him, we shall be like him, 1 John 3:3. And every man that hath this hope that he's coming purifies himself even as he is pure. So what John said in there was really encapsulated the two aspects. You've been declared righteous and holy. There's been a declaration made. But at the same time, out of that declaration, there's this growth that should be taking place that begins to demonstrate the declaration. Are you following me? So you're not working to be declared, but you are obedient to demonstrate.
But then we focused a lot on the outward appearances.
But there's no doubt, Brad, people have warped that. You're right that people have twisted that and then made you do A, B, C, or D, or you're not holy or right before God. Now, and then we do get into those problems.
Right.
But of course, it depends on what angle you're coming from. My feeling is we've overemphasized the declaration to the neglect of the demonstration.
Right.
But the problem is you get in legalistic circles and they've overemphasized the demonstration to the neglect of the declaration.
Right.
So there's always this place that you need to live. All right, now let me try to do post-millennialism here real quick. Let's change colors. Post-millennialism, I'll use green because green means go. All right? All right. Now, okay, I wish I could give you, there's two views of postmillennialism. And I may have to help differentiate this a little bit more. One of the views of postmillennialism has that, again, there is a bodily return. The schematic would look exactly like this. Another form of postmillennialism, now, and I'll get to some of the definitions in here, but the schematic would look exactly like this, but there are some who believe that the coming of the Lord has taken place. Therefore, when ultimately it's lifted up to Him, that's when the end of the age will come. So there's a distinction whether Jesus actually comes bodily or not at the end. So there's a little riff in postmillennial circles over that. But again, they would say Some would say Israel and the church are one people. There are some postmillennialists who would say that now the only true Jew is those that have been circumcised in their heart. So in other words, you may be by race Jewish, just like you may be by race Russian, Chinese, Japanese, whatever. That doesn't matter anymore. What matters is whether or not you've accepted Jesus Christ as the final and only sacrifice. So therefore, Israel isn't even to be distinguished anymore. Some would say that. Others would allow for Israel to maintain its peculiar identity before the Lord. Are you following me on this? That's another distinction. There could be two camps in that area as well. They would maintain, again, that the tribulation is not 7 years, but it's just age long. In other words, you will be facing various forms and intensities of tribulation all through your life. Different areas of the world. You know, you go to some areas of the world right now and you talk to them about great tribulation and they'll laugh at you. And they'll say, it couldn't get any worse than this.
Right.
So understand that there are Christians facing tribulation, great tribulation now. And they simply maintain that it's age long. We'll always be facing it. They maintain that the present age is either the kingdom, which there aren't many that do that, or the church is establishing the kingdom. Hence, when you pray like this: Our Father who art in heaven, hallowed be thy name. Thy kingdom come, thy will be done on as it is in. And is there a responsibility to that prayer? They would say, yeah, absolutely. And so the kingdom, so for a postmillennialist, maybe the only amendment I would probably make, if I could make another little line here, is that they would view, if this is normal status quo existence, they would say that the gospel is ever prevailing. It's ever victorious. And what happens is, until we finally establish Christ's kingdom so that it can be presented to Him.
So I guess what they would say is that at any point, basically, the Christianity, as long as Christianity is growing faster than any other religion, then that's the upward trajectory.
Well,
But if it's not, then how would they?
But you're right. I understand the logic of it, but you have to understand that even if there were, because you and I don't live long enough, Brad, we won't live long enough for us to make that sort of evaluation. The reason being is because let's say there is a 100-year dip. Who's to say? You see, the key to them is not this little slice of your life, and let's evaluate. You've got to look at this globally, and you have to look at it historically. They will fully admit that there were times when Christianity was in deep trouble, the Dark Ages. I mean, there was no witness for 500 years. It was a corrupt Roman Catholic Church. But what did God do? Through a reformer, renewal came, and all of a sudden, it took off exponentially again. So that's the part about postmillennialism you got to get your head wrapped around, is when these guys started talking, they aren't talking this sliver of time. See, the dispensationalist has one advantage over us, that if they want to illustrate deterioration, darkness, apostasy, backsliddenness, You know, hey, what an era. I mean, we've got massive illustrations in order to underscore that that's what it must mean. But you see, but when it gets to almost every religious figure that came across boats to establish this nation was postmillennial in their view. They believed when they were coming to America, they were establishing a missionary sending station. They were establishing the city on a hill. They believed that they were establishing a place where the gospel would be proclaimed, and so his glory would begin to move around the world. They were postmillennial in their view, almost every single one of them. And when you read the textbook, he'll give you can read the footnotes and you'll see that. So that's the thing to me. What started America was not the premillennialists. They were the postmillennialists who had an optimism that we will go. What propelled them to go across the nation? Their optimism that the gospel. Why did Methodist circuit riders run from the eastern seaboard across the Midwest, planting churches everywhere they go, to where now there's a Methodist church. There are more Methodist churches than there are post offices. Why did they do that? If they did, it's not because they believed everything was deteriorating. They did it because they believed the mandate was that this gospel would be known throughout the earth. And yeah, the mandate, going back to what's the mandate, because as soon as his kingdom is established, he comes so it's presented to him.
So you could have a missionary mindset, both premillennial and postmillennial.
Absolutely. The motivations might be different.
Right.
One motivation is we got to hurry up because he's coming any minute and you could be left behind.
Right.
The other motivation is his name must be made known.
Right. Okay.
Not only that, and again, even if you're full-blown Calvinist, which many postmillennialists are, you're still having to declare the gospel to the elect. Because the elect still have to respond. How can they know unless they hear? And how can they hear? All right.
Did you have, didn't you ask? Did you
Yeah,
ask?
I was just wondering, I know Baptists are premillennials, I was wondering if you could give an example of what some of the other denominations that are post and
Presbyterian.
Or postmillennial?
Most postmillennialists are Reformed or Calvinistic in their theology. Most.
Most Baptists aren't really Calvinists. They part Calvinists.
Yeah. No. The only thing the Baptist is Calvinistic on is security,
Right.
and they're schizophrenic. Most of them don't understand. They're Arminian in their evangelistic zeal.
what about the amillennials?
Excuse the amillennialists. Well, it's interesting because there are some Presbyterians that will be that. The more liberal ones will be this. I know I'm on YouTube. The more liberal ones will be this. Of course, I went to an amillennial seminary. The holiness movement, many of them were amillennial because of the issues of perfectionism and entire sanctification. So we could go down the line. Now, in history, today, I'm telling you today, 95% of all evangelicals, I can safely say, are premillennial. Maybe more than that. 95%. Because it's popular. It's the one that has been disseminated out there the most. And again, I don't think amillennialism has it's not the strongest construct, because it deals with just the person, and most of us can go to the scriptures fairly quickly and see that the gospel has ramifications beyond the individual. That there were, even through the Old Testament, there were corporate consecration issues. There were corporate sanctification issues. God judges nations. And when he judges nations, that means nations have to respond to him because they'll be judged. So it's not a strong position.
What would Anglicans and Episcopalians be?
Well, most of them that I'm finding, a lot of them are down here in a post-millennial because of their Reformed thinking. Now, if they're Catholic, again, they may be amillennial if they're Catholic. You know, so if it's an Anglican that leans toward Catholicism, this is what's going to be it. But the others that I know that are Reformed fall down here.
You said there were two parts for postmillennial, but you actually never did name them. What
Well,
You gave descriptions, but you didn't.
yeah, well, I'm not sure I have an exact name for them.
Okay.
One was bodily return, and the other one does Jesus return bodily or not?
Yeah, and it's just a perpetual trajectory. And then some, again, you could use the 1-2. Some
Right.
see Israel and the church as one people, and others, Israel does no longer retain special status.
So we haven't got to the pre, yeah.
Okay, I'm just worn out, so I'm shutting down there before I teach something wrong. All right. Any question? I shot everybody's vocabulary to them, and so you can work on that.
Is there any certain amount that we need to read for next week?
Um,
Just kind of going through it.
Yeah, it starts out with postmillennialism in there, so you probably got a few weeks, but then, I'd read along if I were you, and that way you don't have to hit it hard at the end, but no, not necessarily.
Not like a certain, 2 chapters a week? Or just,
No, I read this afternoon, I had already read the postmillennialism, but I read the responses this afternoon again to it, so I guess, but at the end, the dispensational writer writes a lot more at the end of the book, so anyway, that's what's interesting, so.